Well, hello and welcome to Disciple All Nations. This is a brand new podcast with Dr. Dan Crawford. I am your host, Vidal Muniz. Dr. Crawford, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Well, it's good to have you again, and thank you for spending time with us. We're moving forward into our conversation with the topic of discipleship, which is something that you have invested a lot of time, a lot of your years in ministry, and especially as a professor. We are forever grateful, and particularly for me, able to make contact with you through the ministry of Valley Baptist Missions Education Center, Pastor Robert Rodriguez, and the work that you've been given, and again, investing in South Texas, deep South Texas, with pastors and church leaders. And this morning, we're grateful that we're coming back and to continue the conversation. And Dr. Crawford, today, again, I've been alongside walking through the trainings that you have given us to pastors and the association network of churches down here in South Texas. But after coming after the graduation ceremony, graduation dinner that we had a couple of weeks ago, my understanding was that you received a special gift at the end of our training. And so I'd love for you to talk about it for a quick second. And what is it that was given to you?
Yeah, the pastors listened very well when I taught. In fact, I was amazed at how attentive they were through all the hours of training. And they listened well enough to hear a couple of illustrations I used about my youth and growing up in Houston, Texas, prior to Houston having a Major League Baseball team. So I grew up in Houston in the 1950s when it was the Houston Buffaloes, a Texas League farm team of the St. Louis Cardinals. And I talked about how I had all my life been a St. Louis Cardinals fan. And they listened so well that they gave me a book entitled 101 Reasons to Love the Cardinals. And I treasured that book. I read most of it on the flight back to DFW. And then when the plane landed, I remember putting the book into my overhead luggage and then excited to get home to tell my wife about the book. And when I got home and started unpacking, the book was not in my luggage. And I looked everywhere in that luggage. I took everything out and the book was not to be found. And I concluded that I had lost the book somehow, some way, and I grieved. That was a special, the book was not all that valuable. I don't know how much they paid for it, but it was a gift and it was valuable to me, and I lost it.
That is definitely not a good feeling. And especially when you're traveling, you try to trace back your trip. And obviously, speaking of planes and airports where you have hundreds of people walking through, and typically in a situation like that, my assumption is that you literally lost it. Now, the fact that you're showing the book this morning, we're making the assumption, and I'm saying showing because some folks are going to listen to this podcast. Some are able to actually see the podcast. I'm assuming that the book obviously is back and you have the book, but when you speak of losing the book and losing the gift, that reminded you of a chapter in the Bible. Talk to us a little bit of that reminder.
It did. I remembered Luke 15 is often called the lost and found chapter in the Bible. It's familiar passages. The first parable in the chapter deals with the lost sheep and the shepherd who had the 99 sheep in the fold, but one was gone, and how he went out to find it and brought it back into the fold. And then the second parable is about the woman who had 10 coins. She lost one. She looked everywhere for it. And when she found it, they celebrated. And then the third parable concerns what we call the prodigal son, or we could say the lost son, who went off into a far country, and tells of the father's grief about it. And in all three of those, I realized somebody had lost something and they were grieving over the lostness, and then it was found, which the book was found. About a week or so after I got home, my wife walked into the den holding the book, and she said, "Is this your book?" I said, it is. Where did you find it? And she had seen the corner of the book sticking out from under the bed and reached down there and pulled it out. It obviously had fallen out of my luggage as I unpacked, and it had fallen under the bed. And I never thought to look under the bed. I was just looking in the luggage. But it was a great, it led me back to Luke 15 and the lost and found chapter, and the grief that I was feeling because I had lost such a special gift that had been given to me.
And again, just you mentioned that probably that book can be replaced. And if you Google it, if you look at it at Amazon or something, you can probably get it back. But the meaning, the connection with the individuals, with the pastors, that they have been under your teaching, we have been under your teaching. And obviously, I do remember you making multiple references of sports, because I'm a sports fan as well. And just going into memory lane, and again, just the listening of the pastors, the token of appreciation, especially on graduation night, when we had that dinner. And those relationships seem to me, and you need to correct me if I'm wrong on this, that the relationships between you and the pastors down here continues to grow, continues to develop. And part of it, we typically say in Baptist world that people vote with their feet, because people keep on coming back, to the gatherings. I mean, even this past that gathering that we had, it was a very well attended experience, and I was privileged to translate for you on that Tuesday night on the book of Romans, and it was very, very helpful. So now let me just come back a little bit over the book and the gift. And what about the lesson? Is there a lesson that you have learned through this gift? I know you've made a little bit of reference, but is there anything else that you want to bring into the conversation of what you have learned through the gift experience? The fact that you thought that the book was in your luggage, which it was apparently, but you never thought that it was going to slip, from the luggage and then go under the bed. And thank God for wives, that they always find things for us.
You found it. And in the whole process, I had preached and taught on Luke 15, like most preachers and teachers have. And I thought I'd seen everything in the passage. But when I went back through it this time, the thing that really stood out to me was the fact that when that shepherd got back with the sheep, he called in the other shepherds and they had a party. They celebrated. And the same thing with the woman who found the coin. She called all her friends and they celebrated. And then, of course, when the prodigal son came home, they killed the fatted calf, and then they had a party, a celebration. And I thought, we emphasize lostness so much, especially in that chapter. And then just in general, we emphasize lostness, but we fail to give proper emphasis to the celebration factor. And in all three of these, it talks about how angels rejoice. And I thought, this was something so simple, just a gift book. It was special to me, but it wasn't a thing of value necessarily, except to me. But when my wife walked in with that book, I was ready to have a party. I wanted to celebrate because the lost had been found. And I think there's just a bigger lesson there. And I'm glad that I went back through that to get the emphasis of the celebration that comes at the end.
Dr. Crawford, you make me think and reflect as I'm listening to you. And this is a question more than a statement. Would it be possible that one of the reasons why in today's culture, and I'm speaking of the Christian culture especially, or the Christian environment, but even outside of Christianity, that we are such a moralistic driven generation, that we have minimized and ignored the holiness of God, the bigness of God, the righteousness of God, that as a result of that, we have minimized sin and what has been lost, that community with God, that image and likeness of God back in Genesis 3, that as a result of not knowing what we have lost, is a consequence, as a result, we do not appreciate the celebration. Because this book can potentially be replaced rather fast or quick with no major struggles, but it was the meaning, the connection again to the gift. And so again, my question to you is, what about our moralistic, generation, that we're so driven by the things that we do versus recognizing that there is no restoration without the sacrifice of Christ. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I just agree with you completely that we've lost the joy. We were so caught up in everything else, we missed the party. That life with God is one surprise party after another, and we just, I don't know, we just miss out on the celebration. I'm all for the celebration now.
And I'll tell you what, every month when you come down to South Texas, because you've been very faithful and we are forever grateful for you, and you both are now driving together. It is a celebration. And I'm telling you, I'm seeing the faces of the pastors. I'm seeing the connection. I'm seeing, and I don't know if Robert mentioned this to you, Pastor Robert, but there is a ministerial alliance gathering that happens, I think it's the first Thursday of the month, but here's my point, among the pastors themselves, and they've been studying your books on those gatherings. Now without you, because we studied them with you, but now without you, which implies this is the ripple effect. This is part of the celebration. And I've known you now enough to know that for you, it's a win when the kingdom wins, when there's a win for the kingdom.
Right.
And we see that in the life of pastors. Tell us about, speaking of pastors in deep South Texas, November is around the corner. And I know November is a unique month for multiple reasons. Obviously, Thanksgiving is also a part of November. But when you come down at the end of the month, you're going to be down here at the end of November, meaning the last Tuesday of November. Give us a little preview. What are we looking at when you come down in November?
Well, we've been talking about the prayer-shaped disciple, I call it. And we've reached a part in the outline where we're going to be looking at some of the answers that we can expect from God when we make requests in prayer. And some of those are just very obvious. I mean, sometimes God says yes, and we really like those answers when God agrees with us and says yes to our prayer request. And we look at the biblical character of Jabez. I mean, he became a real hero a few years ago when people discovered this little known character in the Old Testament who asked God for something and God gave him exactly what he asked for. And people went crazy with it. They started putting stickers on their refrigerators and bumper stickers on their cars and wearing t-shirts and praying the prayer of Jabez as if that was going to give them everything they asked for. But many of them learned that sometimes God says no. And that's also a valid answer. And I have people saying, well, God didn't answer my prayer. Yes, he did. He said no. That's an answer. And sometimes God says no. And we need to look at that. And what do we do when God says no? And we'll look at that in November. And then a third very familiar answer is the answer wait. I don't know. Maybe I like no better than I like wait. Wait is tough for a generation of people who get frustrated in front of the microwave because it takes too long, or honk at me because the light just turned green and I didn't move fast enough. Wait is a tough answer, but many biblical examples of God saying you just have to wait. And we have to look at the fact that what happens in the will of God happens in the fullness of time. And so sometimes our time is to wait. So, and then there's some non-familiar kind of answers that God gives. In fact, I think sometimes he says, you got to be kidding. And so we'll just look at several different kinds of answers that God gives when we make requests.
We are recording our podcast just a few days from October 31st, which we, recognize as Reformation Day. And 500 years ago, the issue of justification by faith alone. So as you remind us of what's to come in November, the prayer answers, we typically forget that the vehicle, the trust, the faith that we have to place as we pray, not necessarily on the prayer, but we place our faith in the object of the prayer, which is God. And again, those answers that you're going to be presenting in the next few weeks in November, at the end of November, are going to be reminded of the importance of trusting his trustworthiness, that, as legit as the need might be, as painful as the scenario might, whatever people might be facing, at the end, we have to trust that he is not only a good father, but that he is reliable, he's trustworthy. And this is not easy to do, definitely. We're coming to the end of our podcast. I want to remind our listeners, our audience, number one, that we are grateful that you guys are connecting to this podcast. But specifically, I love for you guys to consider a couple of things. Number one is to visit the website. And I'm speaking of the website for Dr. Dan Crawford, which is discipleallnations.org. discipleallnations.org. At the same time, whatever you're listening, whatever you're watching this podcast from, love for you guys to subscribe. Multiple venues and channels, from YouTube to Facebook to other venues, social media wise. Love for you guys to simply help us by giving a review, giving a like, a subscription to the channels. And obviously, if you want to share this content with friends and family, that's also a blessing. And thank you for your generosity. Dr. Crawford, would you give us a couple of words of just to close our time together, and simply thank our audience to connect today, and give us some closing words, please?
Well, this has been just such a blessing for my wife and I to be a part of what's going on in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, the deep South Texas. That's where we started our ministry after seminary. We lived 6 years in the Rio Grande Valley and loved every minute of it, and grieved when God led us beyond there. But now we're back, and it's as though God's going to let us finish where we started. I'm not thinking I'm close to finishing, but I'm loving being back. And these podcasts are just another way of God fulfilling that early call to be a part of what he was doing in the Rio Grande Valley. I'm looking forward to the next session. I'm always looking forward to coming back and being with the pastors and the church leaders.
Our pastors will get a copy of this podcast as a reminder of what has been done and what is to come in the next few weeks in South Texas. For the rest of us, thank you guys for being here. We'll continue the conversation, and we'll see you guys on our next podcast as we gather together, as we disciple all nations. God bless you.